The air in the university's special collections archive always smelled of sweet decay. Not rot, but the dignified, fragrant dust of centuries. It was a scent of brittle paper, crumbling leather, and the ghost of every hand that had ever turned these pages. For the past 6 months, this scent had been my sanctuary. It was a place where the only ghosts were literary, where the only crumbling was confined to vellum and binding thread, not my own carefully constructed life. I came here to finish my dissertation on the lost women poets of the late 18th century. But really, I came here to hide. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of this hushed, climate-controlled room, and I was grateful for its smallness. It was a fortress against the echoing silence of my apartment, against the pitying glances of my colleagues, against the memory of Audrey's voice, cool and clinical, as she'd explained why my love was simply too much, too consuming for her to manage. "You need to find a way to be whole on your own, Alara," she'd said, as if wholeness were a book you could check out from a library. So I'd tried. I'd poured all that excess love, that terrifying capacity for devotion, into dead women. I traced their ink stains, deciphered their spidery script, and grieved for the poems they'd burned to avoid scandal. They were safe. They couldn't leave me. They could only be discovered. That was why I was still here. Long after the last student had shuffled out, long after the sun had bled out behind the Gothic spires of the theology building. I was on the verge of a breakthrough, a connection between my central subject, Eleanor Vance, and a lesser-known contemporary mentioned only in passing in a single letter. To prove it, I needed to see the original correspondence, a folio so fragile it was kept in the deepest, most secure vault, and that required the head archivist. Her name was Clara. I knew her only as a quiet, efficient presence, a woman who seemed to blend into the oaken shelves and card catalogs, her movements as soft and deliberate as the turning of a page. She was tall, with hair the color of dark honey, pulled back in a simple, elegant twist that never seemed to have a single stray strand. Her clothes were always simple, functional. Charcoal trousers, soft-looking sweaters in shades of cream or moss green. She was a figure of soothing monotony, a human representation of the library's calm. I had, until this moment, been profoundly grateful for her lack of discernible personality. She was a function, a gatekeeper, not a person who could potentially complicate my meticulously curated solitude. "I know it's late, Ms. Rossi," I began, approaching her large oak desk as she was preparing to shut down her computer. My voice felt loud in the deepening quiet. "But I think I've found something. I really need to see the Atherton letters. Folio 7B. She looked up, and for the first time I felt the full, direct force of her gaze. Her eyes were a startling shade of hazel, flecked with gold, and they held a deep, unreadable stillness. There was a faint line of fatigue between her brows. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its heavy pendulum swinging with somber finality. It was already past 7. "Folio 7B requires a 2-hour acclimation period once it's removed from the vault, Dr. Finch," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd expected, a calm alto that seemed to absorb the room's excess silence. "And it can't be left out overnight?" My heart sank, a full-blown, childish plummet of disappointment. "Right, of course, I'm sorry to have bothered you. I was just excited." I could feel a hot flush of embarrassment creeping up my neck. I was acting like a desperate undergrad, not a doctoral candidate on the verge of completing her life's work. I turned to leave, my shoulders slumping with the weight of another 24 hours of waiting, another night of wrestling with the ghosts in my empty apartment. "Wait," she said. I stopped, my hand on the strap of my satchel. She was looking at me, not at the clock, not at her computer. Her gaze was analytical, yet not unkind. She seemed to be weighing something. "You're close to finishing, aren't you?" The Vance dissertation? I was surprised she knew. I am. This could be the final piece. She let out a soft, slow breath, a sound that was barely audible but felt significant. The security rounds are at 10. The main library doors are locked from the outside at 8. If I bring it out now, we'd have to stay until the rounds are complete to ensure it's put back properly. She paused, her eyes searching my face. It would mean being locked in for a few hours. The idea should have been appalling. Trapped, confined, with a stranger. But the alternative, going home to the four walls that had witnessed my slow collapse, was infinitely worse. Here, in the company of books and a quiet woman who smelled faintly of Earl Grey tea and old paper, the confinement felt less like a prison and more like a reprieve. I don't mind, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If you don't, I can't thank you enough. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was a fascinating, fleeting thing. I'll get the folio, she said, rising from her chair with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with the rigid stillness she usually projected. Find a comfortable table. It's going to be a long night. As she disappeared into the echoing corridor that led to the vaults, I stood frozen for a moment, the silence of the archive pressing in on me. It was no longer a peaceful silence. It was charged, anticipatory. I had invited a complication into my fortress. A woman with quiet eyes and a voice like worn velvet. A woman who was willing to be locked in a library with me. And as I went to the long, polished oak table in the center of the reading room, switching on the single green-shaded lamp that cast a warm, intimate circle of light, a treacherous little flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope, ignited in the dusty archive of my heart. I told myself it was for the dissertation. I was a very good liar. The first hour was all about the work. Clara returned bearing a large flat archival box with the reverence of a priest, carrying a sacred relic. She placed it in the center of the lamplight, her long, capable fingers undoing the simple twine tie. My own hands, I noticed, were trembling slightly as I pulled on the requisite white cotton gloves. This was it, the potential key to everything. I'll be at my desk, Clara said, her voice a soft murmur. Let me know if you need a better magnifying glass or assistance with the catalog cross-references. She retreated to the edge of my circle of light, becoming a silhouette against the glowing screen of her monitor. The library settled into a new kind of quiet, a shared quiet. It was punctuated by the delicate, almost inaudible crinkle of ancient paper. As I carefully lifted the first letter from the box and the soft, rhythmic click of her keyboard, we were two people working in parallel, occupying the same space but inhabiting different worlds. My world was 1792, a world of smuggled poems and clandestine correspondences. Hers, I presumed, was the orderly digital world of catalogs and databases. I tried to lose myself in the spidery, faded script. Eleanor Vance's handwriting was a frantic, sloping thing, full of sharp angles and impulsive dashes. She was writing to a Lady Atherton, a known patron of the arts. The letters were mostly pleas for patronage, descriptions of her poverty, her desperate need for a quiet room and a bit of firewood. But I was looking for something else, a name. The name of the poet my research suggested she had not only known, but loved. A woman named Isabelle de Valois, a French émigrée who had published a single, scandalous volume of poetry before disappearing from the historical record entirely. My focus, usually so sharp in the archive's stillness, felt fuzzy, diffused. My awareness kept snagging on the periphery. The soft hum of Clara's computer, the way the lamplight caught the subtle curve of her neck as she leaned forward to read her screen, the scent of her tea, which she was now sipping from a simple ceramic mug. It was a clean, citrusy smell, a bright note against the library's earthy scent profile of dust and decay. I found it distracting. I found her distracting. This was ridiculous. I was a scholar, a professional. I was here to work, not to develop a sudden, inexplicable fascination with the archivist's every-minute gesture. It was the solitude, I told myself. The aftermath of Audrey. My mind was starved for any human interaction that wasn't steeped in pity or professional obligation. Clara was simply a new variable in a long, stagnant equation. That's all it was. Find anything? Her voice startled me. I looked up, my heart giving a stupid little lurch. She was standing just outside the pool of light, her arms crossed over her chest. The green-shaded lamp cast strange, dramatic shadows across her face, hollowing her cheeks and deepening the gold in her eyes. Not yet, I admitted, my voice tight. It's more of the same. Eleanor begging for money. It's disheartening. She was a genius, and she spent most of her life cold and hungry. Most of them did, Clara said, her tone matter-of-fact. She moved closer, stepping into the light. She wasn't looking at me, but at the letter spread out on the velvet-lined tray. We see them as these monumental figures, but they were just people trying to pay their rent. We have requisitions from Milton for more firewood, a bill from a tailor for mending Shelley's coat. Her proximity was unnerving. She stood close enough that I could feel a faint warmth radiating from her, could smell that clean bergamot scent mingling with the papery air. I could see the fine texture of the cream-colored sweater she wore, the way it draped over her shoulders. I had a sudden, insane urge to reach out and touch the fabric, to see if it was as soft as it looked. I curled my gloved fingers into a fist on my lap. It makes them feel more real, I managed to say, my throat feeling dry. And more tragic. Or more human, she countered softly. She pointed a long, elegant finger at a line in the letter, her nail neat and unpolished. Her hand hovered just inches from my own. Her penmanship gets shakier here. See how the ink splatters? She was either cold or upset. I leaned in, my shoulder almost brushing hers. The air between us felt thick, charged. I was intensely aware of her breathing, a slow, steady rhythm next to my own suddenly shallow gasps. I think she was upset, I whispered, focusing on the page with ferocious intensity. This is the part where she mentions her landlord threatening to evict her again. There, Clara said, her voice a low murmur near my ear. I felt the fine hairs on my arms stand up. She steadies herself with a complaint. It's a common coping mechanism. Find a grievance to anchor the panic. I looked up from the letter and met her eyes. She was so close. I could see the tiny radiating lines at the corners of her eyes, the faint dusting of freckles across the bridge of her nose that were invisible from her desk. Her gaze was steady, her expression calm, but there was something in the depths of her eyes, a flicker of knowing, perhaps, or just a reflection of the lamplight. I felt utterly transparent, as if she could see right through my academic bluster to the lonely, frightened woman huddled underneath. Thunk! Clang! The sound was distant but unmistakable, heavy, metallic, and final. It echoed through the vast, empty halls of the library. We both froze. What was that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Clara's expression didn't change, but a new tension entered her stillness. She straightened up, moving out of my personal space, and the sudden coolness on my skin was a palpable loss. That, she said, her calm alto now laced with a thread of resignation, was the night janitor locking the main entrance from the outside. He doesn't have keys to the archive. He just locks the front gate. She glanced at the clock. It was just past 8:30. I guess we're officially here until morning. The words hung in the air between us. Locked in. Until morning. My fortress had just become a gilded cage, and I was trapped inside with the one person who, in the space of a single hour, had managed to breach all my defenses. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. It wasn't the being locked in that scared me. It was who I was locked in with. My first reaction was a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. My mind, usually a bastion of logic and order, scrambled, producing a slideshow of worst-case scenarios. Fire, medical emergency, a sudden, inexplicable need for the outside world. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice high and tight. "There's no other way out? A fire exit? A service door?" Clara's calm was infuriating. She walked over to the towering windows that overlooked the main quad, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The glass was thick, reinforced, showing only our distorted reflections against the inky blackness of the night. "These windows haven't been opened since 1923, she said, her tone dry. "And the fire exits only open from the inside out. They trigger a campus-wide alarm and automatically seal the sector doors to prevent fire from spreading. We trade this room for a 10 by 10 concrete hallway until the fire department broke through. Not an improvement." She turned back to me, her hands tucked into the pockets of her trousers. She looked less like a prisoner and more like a curator surveying her domain after hours. "Our best bet is to get comfortable. The morning shift arrives at 6 a.m. to prep for the opening. That's 9 hours." 9 hours. The number felt immense, a vast, uncharted territory of time. 9 hours to be confined in this echoing silence with this unsettlingly composed woman. I sank back into my chair, the cotton gloves feeling suddenly ridiculous and theatrical. The precious manuscript lay on the table, forgotten. The dead poets couldn't help me now. "I don't have a phone signal," I said, stating the obvious as I watched the no-service icon mock me from my screen. "Of course not," Clara replied. "The walls are 3 feet thick and lined with lead to protect the collection from solar flares. It's a Faraday cage. Good for the books, bad for the social life." A hint of humor touched her voice, the first I'd heard from her. It was a dry, subtle wit that caught me off guard. She seemed to sense my spiraling anxiety. "Look, Dr. Finch." "Ilara," I cut in, the formality suddenly absurd. "If we're going to be trapped together all night, you should probably call me Alara." A small, genuine smile bloomed on her face this time. It changed everything, softening the severe lines of her features and making the gold flecks in her eyes dance. "Clara, then. Alara. There's a staff lounge through that door. It has a couple of reasonably comfortable couches, a kettle, and a tin of truly terrible emergency biscuits. It's not the Ritz, but it's better than these chairs." Her pragmatism was a lifeline. It gave me something to do, a task to focus on other than the frantic thrumming of my own pulse. I carefully placed the top back on the archival box, my hands still not entirely steady. "Okay, the lounge sounds good." I followed her as she led the way, her posture straight and sure. The lounge was a small windowless room, but it felt cozier, more human than the grand, intimidating archive. There were 2 worn leather couches facing each other, a low coffee table scattered with library journals, and a small kitchenette in the corner. The air smelled of coffee and something vaguely like cinnamon. Clara moved with an easy competence, filling an electric kettle from the tap and plugging it in. She found 2 clean mugs and a box of assorted tea bags. "Chamomile?" she offered, holding up a pale yellow packet. "It's supposed to be calming." I nodded, unable to speak. I felt like a child, completely adrift and dependent on her quiet authority. I sank onto one of the couches, the leather sighing under my weight. I watched her movements, the efficient way she tore open the tea bags, the steady pour of the hot water. Her hands were beautiful. I had noticed it before, but now, in this small, quiet space, I could truly appreciate them. They were long-fingered and graceful, but also strong. The hands of someone who did things, who handled fragile history and solved practical problems with equal ease. They were nothing like Audrey's hands, which had always been perfectly manicured, their main purpose to gesture elegantly while making a point. Clara set a steaming mug on the coffee table in front of me. The warmth seeped through the ceramic into my cold hands. "The biscuits really are awful," she said, sitting on the opposite couch. "But they're better than nothing if you get hungry." We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the hum of the kettle as it settled and the soft sip of our tea. The panic in my chest had begun to subside, replaced by a strange, suspended feeling. Time had stopped. The dissertation, my empty apartment, my broken heart, all of it was on the other side of a locked door. In here, there was only the low light, the scent of chamomile, and Clara. I started to see her, really see her, not as an archivist or a gatekeeper, but as a person. I noticed the way she held her mug, wrapped in both hands as if to warm them. I saw the faint silvery scar that ran from her temple into her hairline, a detail I'd never been close enough to observe before. I wondered how she got it. I wondered what she was thinking. Sitting here with a near stranger, her evening plans, whatever they might have been, completely derailed. "You're not panicking," I observed, my voice sounding rusty. She took a slow sip of her tea before answering. "I grew up in a house with 5 siblings and 1 bathroom. Chaos is my native language. This," she gestured around the quiet room, "is peaceful." The image was so contrary to the monastic stillness she projected that I almost laughed. Clara, a product of chaos. It was the first crack in the marble facade, a glimpse of the woman underneath the roll. "So, this is a vacation for you?" I asked, a hint of my own dry humor returning. Her lips curved into that small, captivating smile again. "Let's just say it's not the worst way I've spent a Tuesday night." She looked at me over the rim of her mug, her hazel eyes seeming to hold a genuine curiosity. "What about you, Alara? Are you panicking now?" I considered the question. The frantic edge was gone. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was full, full of her presence. "No," I said, and I was surprised to find it was the truth. "No, I'm not." And in that moment, sitting on a worn leather couch in a locked library in the middle of the night, I realized I felt safer than I had in months. The initial shock of our confinement slowly gave way to a strange, languid peace. The world outside ceased to exist. There were no deadlines, no emails to answer, no sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful friends to avoid. There was only the low hum of the building's ventilation system, the warm circle of light from a single lamp Clara had brought in from the reading room, and the quiet presence of the woman sitting across from me. We talked. At first it was stilted, small talk about the university, the students, the uniquely terrible coffee in the faculty lounge. But as the hours stretched on, the conversation deepened, meandering like a slow river. The confines of the small room, the shared absurdity of our situation, seemed to dissolve the usual social barriers. "So, Eleanor Vance," Clara said, leaning forward to rest her elbows on her knees. The position was casual, relaxed, and it made her seem more accessible. "Why her? Out of all the lost poets, why did you choose her?" It was a question my committee had asked in a formal, academic way, but coming from Clara, it felt different. It felt personal. I hesitated, swirling the lukewarm dregs of my chamomile tea in my mug. "I don't know." I began, then stopped. Lying seemed pointless in this strange, timeless bubble. "That's not true. I know exactly why. It's because her poems feel forbidden." She wrote about desire, about her body, about wanting things a woman in 1792 wasn't supposed to want. And she wrote about it with this fierce, unapologetic passion. But she was terrified. You can feel the terror right alongside the passion. Most of her work she burned. We only have what she sent to patrons, or what she copied for her friends. I let the word hang in the air. The central thesis of my dissertation, the part I was still struggling to prove, was that her most important friend was another woman. You think her passion was for Isabelle de Valois? Clara stated. It wasn't a question. I stared at her, my mouth slightly agape. How did you know that? I haven't even formally proposed that part of my thesis yet. She gave a small shrug, a self-deprecating gesture. I'm an archivist, Ilara. I read things. I read your proposal. I've read Vance's letters. I've read de Valois' single blistering book of poetry. The connection isn't in the facts. Not yet. It's in the negative space. It's in what Vance doesn't say when she mentions Isabel. It's in the sudden shift in her handwriting, the way the ink gets darker, more urgent. She looked at me, her eyes serious. You're right about her. You just need to find the proof. Hearing my own conviction mirrored in her calm, certain voice was like a dam breaking inside me. I had been so alone with this theory, fighting against the skepticism of my advisor, who called it speculative biography. But Clara saw it. She saw the ghost in the machine, the love story written in invisible ink between the lines. My ex, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. She told me I was projecting, that I was seeing sapphic romance everywhere because, well, I trailed off, the shame of it hot on my cheeks. Because you're a woman who loves women? Clara finished for me, her voice gentle, devoid of judgment. I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I focused on a crack in the leather of the couch. Audrey, my ex. She's a historian too. A classicist. Very logical. She said I let my identity cloud my scholarship, that I was turning Eleanor Vance into a mirror for my own intensity. The last word was a bitter pill. It was Audrey's favorite weapon. You're too intense, Ilara. Your feelings are too big. It's exhausting. Intensity is not a character flaw, Clara said, her voice firm. It cut through my haze of self-recrimination. Especially not for a scholar. It's a tool. It's what helps you see the things other people miss, the things they're too afraid to look for. She paused, and when I finally dared to look up, her expression was soft, her eyes full of a startling empathy. And anyone who makes you feel that your passion is a burden isn't worthy of it. Tears pricked my eyes. Hot, stupid, embarrassing tears. I hadn't cried over Audrey in months. Not since the first brutal week. But this simple, unequivocal validation from a woman I barely knew undid me. It wasn't pity. It was solidarity. It was acceptance. I quickly wiped at my eyes with the back of my hand, mortified. I'm sorry, I mumbled. I don't know why I'm... Don't apologize, she said softly. It's a long night. She didn't press. She didn't offer platitudes. She simply let my vulnerability exist in the space between us, creating a pocket of safety I hadn't realized I was so desperate for. She stood and refilled the kettle, the simple domestic act a grounding force. As she brought me a fresh mug of tea, our fingers brushed. It was the barest, most fleeting of contacts. But a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if burned. She didn't react, her expression unreadable as she returned to her couch. But the air in the room had changed. The quiet was no longer just peaceful. It was charged, humming with a new unspoken awareness. The first crack in my armor had been breached, and something new, something terrifying and beautiful, was beginning to seep in. After my embarrassing display of emotion, a comfortable silence settled between us again. But it was a different kind of silence. It was heavier, freighted with the weight of my confession and her quiet acceptance. The space between the two couches felt both wider and more charged. I was acutely aware of her, of the way the lamplight carved her profile from the shadows, of the slow, even rhythm of her breathing. To break the spell, I asked, "What about you, Clara? You said you grew up in a chaotic house. Is that why you chose this? The silence?" The order? She smiled, a slow, thoughtful expression that made my stomach do a little flip. Partly, she admitted. My house was loud, full of people, full of drama. The local library was my refuge. It was the only place where no one was yelling, where no one needed anything from me. It was just me and the stories. She looked around the small lounge, her gaze distant, as if seeing something far beyond its walls. I loved the idea that every book was a self-contained world. You could open it, live inside it for a while, and then close it, and it would be waiting for you, unchanged, when you came back. It felt safe. I understand that, I said, thinking of my own retreat into the past. But that wasn't the only reason, she continued, her eyes finding mine again. My grandmother was a bookbinder. Her workshop was this magical place, filled with the smell of leather and glue and beeswax. She taught me how to stitch signatures, how to tool leather, how to mend a broken spine. She used to say that we weren't just saving books, we were saving memories, that every book held the memory of the person who wrote it and every person who had ever read it. Her voice was soft, laced with a warmth that I hadn't heard before. She was talking about something she loved, and it transformed her. The professional reserve melted away, revealing a deep well of passion that mirrored my own. She believed that stories were the most durable things we make, Clara said. Empires fall, buildings crumble, people die, but a good story can live forever, as long as someone is there to care for it. She gestured vaguely towards the archive beyond the door. That's what I do. I'm a caretaker of stories. I was completely captivated. Here was this woman, who I had dismissed as a quiet functionary, revealing a soul as romantic and devoted as my own. We were both caretakers, in our own way. She preserved the physical vessels of stories. I tried to resurrect the stories that had been lost. That's beautiful, I whispered, and I meant it. She seemed a little embarrassed by her own earnestness, a faint pink tinge coloring her cheeks. It sounds a bit lofty when I say it out loud, she mumbled, looking down into her mug. No, it doesn't, I insisted. It sounds true. An idea sparked in my mind, a way to bridge the remaining distance between us, to share a piece of my world the way she had just shared a piece of hers. Can I show you something? I asked. She looked up, curious. Back in the reading room? Yes. We left the cozy intimacy of the lounge and returned to the grand cavernous archive. The single lamp on the table seemed smaller now, a tiny island of light in an ocean of darkness. The silence felt more profound, a sacred hush. I carefully reopened the archival box. My hands were steady now. I bypassed Eleanor Vance's desperate, pleading letters and retrieved a smaller, separate folio tucked at the bottom. It was Isabelle de Valois' book. It was thin, bound in simple faded blue paper. The title, Les Heures Intimes, The Intimate Hours, printed in unassuming font. This is the only known copy of her work, I said, my voice low with reverence. The rest were seized and destroyed by her family after she disappeared. I opened it carefully. The poems were in French, a language I was fluent in, but the emotion they conveyed was universal. They were sensual, heartbreaking, and fiercely intelligent. They spoke of a secret love, a constellation, and a northern star that guided the poet through a dark world. My thesis argued that Eleanor Vance was that northern star. I handed the book to Clara. She took it with an archivist's care, her fingers gentle on the fragile binding. She didn't need cotton gloves. Her hands were clean and dry, her touch practiced and sure. I've seen the catalog entry, she said, but I've never read it. She began to read, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was a fast reader, her eyes scanning the French text with an ease that surprised me. I watched her face, searching for a reaction. I saw her eyebrows lift in surprise at a particularly bold turn of phrase, saw the corner of her mouth twitch at a line of dark, witty despair. She was not just reading the words, she was understanding them, feeling them. After a few minutes, she looked up at me, her hazel eyes wide and luminous in the lamplight. "My God," she breathed. "She's writing to Eleanor." My heart soared. "You see it?" "It's her," Clara whispered, her finger tracing a line of text without touching the page. "This metaphor here, my steadfast English oak, that's what Vance called herself in a letter to her brother. And this part, about a mind that burns like a winter fire, that's pure Eleanor." She looked at me, a brilliant, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Alara, this is it. This isn't subtext. This is a conversation." Her excitement was a mirror of my own. We were two detectives who had just found the crucial clue, two astronomers who had just discovered a new star. In that moment, we were not archivist and scholar, not strangers trapped in a library. We were partners. We were a team. And the joy of that shared discovery was a more potent intoxicant than I could ever have imagined. It was a connection forged not in small talk, but in the hallowed space of a shared intellectual passion. It was, I realized with a jolt, intensely intimate. The shared triumph over Isabelle de Valois' poems shifted the atmosphere between us completely. We were no longer just two people making the best of a strange situation. We were collaborators, co-conspirators, in the act of uncovering a centuries-old secret. The energy was palpable, a bright humming current in the quiet room. We leaned over the slim volume together, our heads close, our shoulders occasionally brushing. Each time our bodies made contact, no matter how slight, a spark of awareness shot through me. I was intensely conscious of the scent of her, that clean mix of bergamot and something warm and vaguely woody, like sandalwood. It was a scent I was beginning to associate with safety, with intellectual excitement, with her. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a stanza. My gloved finger was next to her bare one, the contrast of the sterile white cotton and her warm, living skin, a startling intimacy. She talks about receiving a letter, a brittle leaf from a northern shore. Vance was in Yorkshire when she wrote the letter I found last week. It's the same timeline. "It's a direct response," Clara breathed, her eyes shining. "She's practically quoting her. We could cross-reference the dates of postage. The postal records for that period are a mess, but some of them exist. They're in the sub-basement." Her enthusiasm was infectious. For a moment, I forgot we were trapped. I forgot Audrey. I forgot my anxieties. I forgot everything but the thrill of the chase. "You're brilliant," I said, looking up from the book and straight into her eyes. Or we were closer than I'd realized. The lamplight softened the angles of her face, catching in her dark honey hair and turning the gold flecks in her eyes to molten fire. The triumphant smile on her lips faded into something softer, more questioning. The air grew thick and heavy. The silence was no longer about books. It was about us. The world narrowed to the space between our faces. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin. My own breathing hitched. My mind, usually a cacophony of analysis and anxiety, went utterly blissfully silent. There was only one thought, one impulse, a magnetic pull that was drawing me forward. I wanted to close the distance. I wanted to know if her lips were as soft as they looked. It was an almost moment, so potent and so real. I could almost taste it. We were suspended on the precipice. The slightest movement from either of us would be enough to tip us over. Bisht, bisht. The sudden jarring vibration from my satchel on the floor shattered the spell. We both jumped back as if electrocuted. The moment was gone, evaporated into the dusty air. Flustered, I fumbled for my phone. A single miraculous bar of service had appeared. A text message glowed on the screen. It was from my sister Megan. Just checking in. Hope we're not moping in that dusty old library all night. Met a really nice guy at work, an architect, super smart. Think you'd like him. Let's get drinks when you're back in the real world. XOXO. The message was like a blast of icy water. The real world. A world where my well-meaning sister was still trying to set me up with nice guys, unable or unwilling to fully grasp the fact that my heartbreak, the one I was moping over, was because of a woman. A world where my love was an inconvenient phase to be managed, or preferably ignored. The carefully constructed piece of the night, the burgeoning connection with Clara, suddenly felt fragile, fantastical, a dream that would vanish with the morning light. My face must have fallen, because when I looked up, Clara's expression was etched with concern. The charged energy was gone, replaced by a cautious distance. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Fine," I lied, my voice brittle. "Just my sister. Checking in." I shoved the phone back into my bag, wanting to erase the intrusion. But it was too late. The outside world, with all its expectations and misinterpretations, had breached our sanctuary. Clara nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She straightened up, creating more space between us. "It's getting late," she said, her professional archivist persona slipping back into place like a familiar coat. "We should probably try to get some sleep. The morning will be here before we know it." The shift was jarring. We were back to being two strangers managing a logistical problem. The shared intimacy, the thrill of discovery, the heart-stopping proximity. It all felt like a hallucination. Yes, I agreed, my own walls sliding back into place. It was a familiar, miserable comfort. "You're right." She carried the lamp back to the lounge, and I followed, the archival box feeling heavy in my hands again. She placed the lamp on the coffee table between the two couches. "You can take that one," she said, gesturing to the couch I'd occupied earlier. "I'll take this one. There are a couple of emergency blankets in that cupboard. They're clean, just a bit scratchy." We moved with a stilted, awkward politeness, retrieving the thin gray blankets and arranging them on our separate couches. The space between us was no longer a cozy shared territory, but a starkly defined border, a no man's land. Clara switched off the main lounge light, leaving only the single lamp burning between us, a lonely beacon in the dark. She lay down on her couch, turning her back to me. "Good night, Ilara." "Good night, Clara," I whispered to her unmoving form. I lay down on my own couch, the scratchy wool of the blanket rough against my cheek. The leather was cold. I stared into the darkness, my mind racing. The memory of that almost kiss, the feeling of her breath on my skin, was seared into my brain. It played on a loop, a beautiful, painful fragment of what might have been, but it was tangled now with the image of my sister's text, with the memory of Audrey's dismissal, with a lifetime of feeling like my desires were a complication, a problem to be solved or hidden. I was a fool to think this could be different. Clara was kind. She was intelligent and beautiful, and she saw me in a way I hadn't been seen in a very long time. But we were in a bubble, a fantasy fueled by confinement and late-night confessions. The morning would come, the doors would be unlocked, and we would walk out into the real world, where women like me got their hearts broken by women like Audrey, and where our sisters tried to set us up with nice male architects. I listened to the sound of Clara's breathing in the darkness, a slow, steady rhythm that I tried to match with my own. But my heart wouldn't slow down. It was aching with a frantic, hopeless yearning. The fortress I had built around myself was in ruins, and I was more alone than ever, lying just 10 feet away from the woman who had, in the space of a few hours, shown me everything I was terrified to want. The darkness in the lounge was thick and absolute beyond the small puddle of light from the lamp. It was a silence that wasn't empty, but full of unspoken things. It was full of the ghost of our almost kiss. It was full of the scratchy sound of my wool blanket and the soft sigh of the leather couch every time I shifted my weight. Mostly, it was full of the sound of Clara breathing. I couldn't sleep. My mind was a battlefield. On one side was the raw, undeniable memory of the connection I'd felt with Clara, the intellectual spark, the emotional validation, the visceral, magnetic pull. On the other side was a lifetime of scar tissue. There was Audrey, her cool condescension disguised as concern, chipping away at my confidence until I believed my passion was a pathology. There was my family, loving but uncomprehending, their casual heteronormativity a constant, low-grade hum of alienation. My sister's text wasn't malicious. It was worse. It was thoughtless. It was a reminder that in her world, my world didn't fully exist. I replayed the moment by the table, the way Clara's eyes had darkened, the way her lips had parted slightly. She had felt it too. I was sure of it. But then the phone had buzzed, and the real world had intruded, and she had retreated so quickly, so completely. Maybe she was just being kind. Maybe she was a deeply empathetic person who got caught up in the strange intimacy of the night. Maybe her retreat wasn't because of the interruption, but because she'd come to her senses, realizing she was getting too close to a woman who was clearly a mess. A woman who cried about her ex at the drop of a hat. An intense woman. The word echoed in my head. Audrey's voice sharp and clinical. It's just too much, Alara. I squeezed my eyes shut, the scratchy blanket a poor comfort. I was an idiot. I had mistaken a moment of shared intellectual excitement and forced proximity camaraderie for something more. I had projected my own desperate loneliness onto her, painting her as a romantic heroine in my own pathetic drama. She was a professional, and I was a case study in emotional instability unfolding on her couch. The thought was so humiliating it made my stomach clench. I tried to focus on my breathing, on the solid reality of the couch beneath me. But my senses were traitorously attuned to her. I could hear the faint rustle as she shifted, the slight change in the rhythm of her breathing. Was she awake too? Was she lying there, regretting her kindness, counting the minutes until morning when she could escape me? The yearning was a physical ache in my chest. It was so much more complicated than simple desire. I didn't just want to kiss her. I wanted to talk to her for hours. I wanted to know how she got the scar on her temple. I wanted to hear more stories about her bookbinding grandmother. I wanted to sit with her in comfortable silence, our shoulders touching, and feel that sense of rightness again. I wanted the woman who had looked at me and said, "Intensity is not a character flaw." This was so much more dangerous than Audrey. With Audrey, the attraction had been a slow burn, a gradual alignment of minds and lives. This thing with Clara was a lightning strike. It was sudden, total, and terrifyingly bright. It had illuminated all the dark, empty corners of my life in one brilliant flash. And now, in the ensuing darkness, the afterimage was burned onto the backs of my eyelids. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the ceiling I couldn't see. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. I had to know what she was thinking. I had to break this awful, polite tension. But what could I say? Sorry for almost throwing myself at you over a 200-year-old poem. Please ignore the fact that I'm clearly unraveling. My pride, what was left of it, kept me silent. My fear kept me still. Fear of rejection, yes. But more than that, fear of confirmation. Fear that she would confirm my worst insecurities. That I was too much. That she was just being polite. That the moment had meant nothing to her. It was safer to lie here in this agony of uncertainty than to risk the finality of a gentle, pitying denial. So I lay there, rigid with unspoken feelings, 10 feet of darkness separating me from the only person in the world I wanted to talk to. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. The lamp on the table cast a lonely glow, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between us, each one a tiny, shimmering particle of everything I couldn't say. The night, which had started as a strange adventure, had become a form of exquisite torture, and morning, which had seemed an eternity away, couldn't come soon enough. "You're not sleeping either." Her voice, when it came, was a soft, low thing that cut through the oppressive silence without shattering it. It wasn't an accusation or a question, just a simple statement of fact. She had rolled over to face me, a dark shape on the opposite couch. I could just make out the glint of the lamplight in her eyes. My breath caught. "No," I whispered back. "My brain won't shut up." "Mine either," she admitted. A small confession that felt monumental. She was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting. "Your sister's text," she said, her voice still quiet but gaining a thread of firmness. "It upset you?" Again, a statement, not a question. She saw everything. I let out a shaky breath, the pretense of being fine, suddenly too heavy to maintain. "It's stupid. She means well. She just doesn't get it. She thinks I'm sad about a breakup, like it's an abstract concept. She doesn't understand that I'm sad about a woman, about Audrey, and her solution is to find me a nice man, as if that's a simple substitution, like switching from tea to coffee." The bitterness I'd been swallowing all night rose up in my throat. "It's a reminder that my life, my real life, is invisible to most of the people who are supposed to love me." Clara was silent for a moment. Then, I heard the rustle of her blanket, the creak of leather. She sat up. Her silhouette was stark against the lamplight. "My parents still send me links to the Catholic singles website my cousin used," she said, her voice wry. "They think my roommate of 5 years was just a very dedicated friend who helped with rent." I pushed myself up on my elbows, staring at her across the small space. "You?" "Her name was Maria," Clara said softly. "She was a musician. We were together for 8 years. She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." The words landed in the quiet room with the weight of stones, the casual cruelty of her parents' emails, the depth of her hidden grief. It was a world of pain contained in 2 short sentences. All my self-pity, all my angst over Audrey and my sister's cluelessness felt trivial, childish in comparison. "Clara," I breathed, my heart aching for her. "I am so sorry. I had no idea." "How could you?" she said with a small, sad shrug. "It's not something I talk about. It's easier to just be the quiet archivist. People don't ask a lot of questions." She had built a fortress, too, a much more formidable one than mine. And then she did the last thing I expected. She stood up. In 2 silent steps, she crossed the space between us and sat down on the edge of my couch. My entire body went rigid. She was so close. The lamp was behind her, putting her face in shadow. But I could feel the heat of her, smell the scent of her skin. The scratchy blanket was a flimsy barrier between her hip and my leg. "Alara," she said, her voice dropping even lower, becoming an intimate murmur that was meant only for me. "When you looked at me back there, by the table, I haven't had anyone look at me like that since Maria. Like I was seen. The real me, not the role I play every day." My throat was too tight to speak. "And I panicked," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "When your phone buzzed, it was an excuse, a way to run. Because feeling that again, it terrified me. I thought I had locked that part of myself away for good, that it had died with her." She reached out, her hand hovering in the space between us for a heart-stopping second, before she gently, tentatively, laid it on my arm, over the wool of the blanket. Her touch was electric. It wasn't a spark this time. It was a current flowing directly into my heart. But it didn't, did it? She whispered, her gaze searching mine in the dim light. Because I'm sitting here, and my heart is hammering in my chest, and all I can think about is how much I want to kiss you. And I am so scared of what that means. The dam inside me broke. All the fear, all the yearning, all the lonely nights and the bitter memories. They were washed away by the raw, stunning power of her honesty. She was scared, too. She was just as broken, just as terrified, just as human as I was. Me too, I whispered, the words a ragged exhalation. Clara, I'm so scared. Her thumb stroked my arm, a small, soothing motion that was also impossibly sensuous. I know. She leaned in, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I leaned forward to meet her, my eyes fluttering shut. Her lips were just as soft as I had imagined. The first touch was hesitant, questioning, a whisper of a kiss. It was a question, and my response was the answer. I leaned into her, my hand coming up to cup her jaw, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at her nape. The kiss deepened, becoming a conversation. It spoke of loneliness and longing, of shared grief and surprising joy. It was a kiss of recognition, a homecoming. It tasted of chamomile tea and salt, from the tears that were suddenly, silently, streaming down my face. She pulled back just enough to rest her forehead against mine. We were both breathing heavily, our breath mingling in the cool air. Her hand was still on my arm, a warm, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. So, I managed to say, my voice thick and shaky, a weak attempt at levity. This is happening. I felt her smile against my skin. Yes, she said, her voice firm and sure and full of a quiet, breathtaking hope. It is. In the aftermath of the kiss, we didn't speak for a long time. There was no need. We just stayed there, foreheads pressed together, her hand a warm, steady presence on my arm, my fingers still loosely tangled in the hair at her nape. The silence was no longer tense or empty. It was full, humming with the energy of everything that had just been acknowledged between us. It was a space of pure, unadulterated feeling. I could feel the frantic beat of her heart, or maybe it was my own, echoing through our points of contact. The tears on my cheeks had begun to dry, leaving my skin feeling tight. Clara shifted slightly, and her thumb brushed against my cheek, gently wiping away the trace of a tear. The gesture was so tender, so impossibly gentle, it almost broke me all over again. Hey, she whispered, her voice a low rumble that I felt as much as heard. Hey, I whispered back, my eyes still closed. I was afraid to open them, afraid this was all a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and loneliness. You're okay, she said, as if reading my mind. I finally opened my eyes. Her face was inches from mine, her features soft and indistinct in the dim light. But her eyes, those incredible hazel eyes, were clear and bright, reflecting the single lamp. They were full of a raw vulnerability that mirrored my own. I'm better than okay, I admitted, my voice husky. I moved my hand from her hair to her cheek, my thumb tracing the faint silvery line of the scar at her temple. You are incredibly brave. A shadow passed over her features. I don't feel brave. I feel reckless. Sometimes they're the same thing, I said. Thank you for being reckless. She leaned into my touch, her eyes closing for a moment. I haven't talked about Maria with anyone but my therapist. I didn't think I could. I'm glad you did, I said, my voice thick. I'm glad you told me. A new reality was beginning to dawn, pushing through the haze of emotion. This wasn't just a kiss. This wasn't a fleeting moment of connection born of circumstance. It was something real, something with weight. And with that weight came the inevitable question. "Clara," I began, my voice hesitant, "what happens when they unlock the doors?" She pulled back slightly, just enough to meet my gaze fully. The fear was back in her eyes, but it was tempered with something else now. Resolve. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'd like to find out, if you would." The hope that bloomed in my chest was so fierce it was painful. I would. We sat there for another moment, the chasm of the real world looming but no longer feeling insurmountable. It was a problem to be solved, not a verdict to be accepted. Clara stood up, but she didn't go back to her couch. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket, which was draped over the arm of her couch, and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook and a pen. Her movements were deliberate, thoughtful. She sat back down on the edge of my couch, closer this time. She flipped to a clean page, and, in a neat, elegant script that was so different from Eleanor Vance's frantic scrawl, she wrote something down. She tore the page out carefully and folded it in half. "My number is in the university directory," she said, her voice steady. "But I want you to have my personal one." She pressed the folded paper into my hand. Her fingers were warm against my palm. "This one is for after hours." The simple, concrete act was more reassuring than any promise. It was a bridge, a tangible link between this strange, magical night and the uncertain morning to come. It was a plan. It was an invitation. I closed my hand around the paper, the sharp edges of it a grounding reality. "Thank you." She didn't move. The space between us was still charged, but the desperation was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering tenderness. She looked from my hand, clenched around her number back to my face. "Can I?" she started, then hesitated. "Yes," I said, not even needing her to finish the question. She leaned in and kissed me again. This time it was different. It was slow, deep, and sure. There was no fear in it, only a profound sense of discovery. It was a confirmation, a seal on a pact made in the dead of night in the heart of a silent library. It was the beginning of a new story, one we would have to write ourselves. The first hint of morning was not a light, but a sound, a faint distant rattle, followed by the squeak of a heavy door, then the low hum of a floor polisher echoing from the main hall. The real world was waking up. Clara and I had eventually fallen asleep, not on our separate couches, but on mine. I had woken up an hour or so before dawn, my head pillowed on her shoulder, her arm draped loosely around my waist, the scratchy blanket covering us both. I hadn't moved, had barely breathed, just soaking in the unfamiliar feeling of safety, of being held. The paper with her number was still clutched in my hand. When the sound started, she stirred. Her eyes opened, clouded with sleep for a moment before clearing with recognition. A slow, soft smile touched her lips. "Morning," she murmured, her voice thick and gravelly. "Morning," I whispered back, my heart doing a slow, painful flip. It was real. This was all real. The harsh fluorescent lights of the main archive flickered on, flooding our cozy lounge with sterile, unwelcome brightness. The spell was broken. We sat up, blinking like startled owls, suddenly aware of our disheveled state, the intimacy of our shared couch now starkly visible. A key scraped in the lock of the archive's main door. A portly man in a security guard's uniform pushed it open, his expression one of tired routine, until he saw us emerging from the staff lounge. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then in alarm. "Whoa, hey, the archive is closed," he sputtered. Clara stepped forward, all traces of sleep vanishing as her professional calm descended like a veil. "It's all right, Gary, it's me," Clara Rossi. Dr. Finch and I were working late on a sensitive manuscript, and the main doors were locked before we could get out. Gary's alarm softened into flustered embarrassment. Oh, Ms. Rossi, geez. You scared me. We didn't have anyone on the overnight sign out sheet. I thought you were, well, I don't know what I thought. Our mistake, Clara said smoothly, giving him a reassuring smile. We lost track of time. Thank you for letting us out. Yeah, sure. No problem, he mumbled, his gaze flicking between me and Clara. A flicker of dawning suspicion in his eyes as he likely took in our rumpled clothes and the shared blanket still pooled on one couch. We gathered our things in a shared, slightly awkward silence. I slipped the precious archival box into my satchel, its contents now holding a new layer of significance. It was not just the key to my dissertation, it was the catalyst for this, for us. We walked out of the archive and into the main library. The morning light was pouring through the grand arched windows, illuminating the swirling dust motes in a way that felt hopeful, not melancholy. The air smelled of floor polish and fresh coffee from the cart being set up near the entrance. It was a new day. At the library's main doors, we paused. The quad outside was starting to fill with students, a river of life and noise. It was time to step back into the current. So, I said, my voice a little unsteady. Clara turned to me. In the bright, unforgiving light of morning, she looked tired, but the warmth in her eyes was undeniable. So, she echoed. She glanced down at my hand, which was still clutching her number. Don't lose that. I won't, I promised. I have to go open the vaults and write a very creative incident report, she said with a wry smile, before Gary's imagination runs wild. And I have to go home and take a shower, I said, suddenly aware of how I must look and smell. An unspoken question hung between us. What now? Clara answered it. I get a lunch break at 1, she said, her gaze direct and unwavering. There's a small cafe a block from here, the Black Cat. Their coffee is much better than the faculty lounges. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an invitation, a plan. A grin spread across my face, wide and genuine, and so full of relief it almost hurt. 1 o'clock, I confirmed. I'll be there. Good, she said. And then, right there, in the bustling entrance of the library, she reached out and squeezed my arm, a brief, firm touch that was both a promise and a farewell. She turned and walked back toward the archives, her posture as straight and sure as ever. I watched her go, a figure of quiet strength who had unlocked so much more than a library vault for me. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The world felt different, brighter, sharper. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for months was gone, replaced by a fluttering, terrifying, wonderful lightness. I didn't know what would happen at 1 o'clock, or the day after, or the year after that. I didn't know how we would navigate the complexities of her grief or my fears. But for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid of the not knowing. I was choosing to step into it. I had walked into that library to find closure in the story of a dead woman, and instead, I had found a beginning with a living one. And I knew with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones that my life would never be the same. Have you ever been so guarded, so sure you needed to be alone, only to have one person and one unexpected night change everything? Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves are the very things keeping love out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding light in the most unexpected places.